sketchy times that I've found myself in rock climbing, so that hopefully you can learn from my mistakes or missteps. And I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times written down here, and I'm just going to walk through each one of them. Yeah, some of these I almost got really hurt or killed in. So I just want to share what happened to me so that it doesn't happen to you, or you can mitigate for it. But the first of the 6 is not locking this carabiner when I set up my personal anchor. So I was in a scenario where I had a personal anchor set up to an anchor, and it was just a sling clipped onto my personal anchor and then onto the actual built anchor. And I was messing around. I don't know exactly what I was doing, setting up a rappel or something, I forget. But I looked up, and mind you, this personal anchor is my entire life is relying on this. I'm 50 feet off the ground. And I see this carabiner is open. It's open, and my sling, the only thing it's actually open this way, I guess. And the sling was literally just hanging on the edge. So half of the sling was completely outside of the carabiner, and half of the sling was on the inside, and my entire life was hanging off that. So I was messing around. I looked back up, and because I hadn't locked this carabiner, it was somehow able to jiggle its way out, and it was just hanging on the little nose. So you can imagine half of it on, half of it off, which was absolutely terrifying, right? Super, super scary. So immediately I grabbed the anchor, pulled myself in, managed the sling to get back in, and then spun and locked it. But it terrified me, as it should. And, I'm sure most of you would also be terrified. So from that day, kind of the tactic that I started to employ was every single time I place a locking carabiner, right away, I lock it. The only times that I don't lock it right away is if I'm going to be placing a rope in it immediately after. So if I'm setting up an anchor and I'm putting on a carabiner and then clipping a rope through it, obviously I won't lock it until the rope is in it. But the second I put that rope in, I lock it. So now a technique that, probably gets taught to people when they're learning, but whatever reason wasn't taught to me, is that when you clip a carabiner that can be locked, you lock it all the time. And you can do this even in scenarios where you could be using a non-locker, but you're choosing to use a locker. I would recommend just getting in the habit of locking it every time. That way you don't almost die like I did. So that's number 1. Number 2 here, I'll kind of set the scene. So there's a place in Squamish called Cheakamus Canyon, super common climbing area. It's got a lot of easy stuff. And we were climbing a climb that I've done literally dozens of times. And I'm climbing with a buddy who I've been climbing with before. He doesn't climb very often, probably like once or twice a season. But we learned to climb together 4 years previously, and I've been climbing with him a lot before. He's not a big climber, but I trusted him. A little bit of a spacey guy, like not the most reliable dude in all ways, like ex-stoner. He didn't smoke weed anymore at the time, but he was just like not super reliable, but I trusted him enough to belay me. And we were at the crag, and we're literally 50 feet from my car. And I actually left my gree in my car, but I had my ATC on me, as I always do. So I was like, oh, whatever, we won't go back and grab the gree, just use the ATC. And you may or may not know this, but ATCs don't have the auto locking feature that a gree does. It's just a piece of metal that puts bends in the rope. So if your hand is loose on the rope or lets go entirely, it'll just run through the system. So I climb up to the top of the climb. There's muzzy hooks there. Clip the chains. I say take. I feel the rope get taut, at which point you just sit back in the rope and put your weight into it. And as I sit back into the rope, I just began falling, which is, I don't even remember exactly how I felt. I was probably more surprised than anything. But yeah, it kind of just, you're falling, right? So I fell for probably like 20, 25, 30 feet. I don't even know. And then he finally, I guess, figured out what the fuck was going on, excuse my language, and grabbed the rope. And I stopped and I looked down and I was just really mad at him. And I was like, dude, what are you doing? Like, let me down as slow as you possibly can. I got to the ground and I was just like pretty upset with him. But also upset with myself just for trusting him with the device. He doesn't climb often. He's not disciplined. Looking back, I could have foreseen that becoming an issue, but I trust him with an ATC anyway. So the moral of that story is use gree-grees for people who aren't climbing often, and make sure if you're handing a non-auto locking device, like a tube style device, to someone, they're really on their game, because they could drop you off a cliff. Going off route on a trad climb is the next one I have here for number 3. So this was basically, I just didn't read the route description well, or if I did read it, I kind of misjudged what it said. And trad climbing, it's a little harder to figure out the route sometimes because you don't have bolts guiding you. You only have bolts at the anchors and maybe blank sections in the middle that someone has placed a bolt to be nice. But on this specific climb, there was 2 crack systems, and I had thought that the crack system, to the right was the one I was meant to be following. So I followed that up and kind of scrambled into a weird area. And I found myself like really high above my last piece. And also down climbing would have been really tough. So I kind of had to choose between sketchy, slabby down climbing or a little bit of a committing move out around this corner where I then knew the anchor was, because I was like, okay, I'm stuck here. So I got pretty off route and had to do a burly move to get back en route. And if I was to fall, it would have been a really far fall. So I think the moral of that story was just being a bit more slow in my assessment of like which way the route is going, and also doing a bit more research ahead of time, especially on trad routes. That way I can be a bit more dialed in where I'm headed and don't find myself, stranded in a weird area and not able to place any gear in the wall, because the area I got in, I just couldn't even place. I had a lot of gear on me, but there was nowhere I could jam it in. So that sucked. I didn't get hurt there once again, luckily, but I could have been a very different story. Number 4, not enough quick draws. This one, it wasn't actually that dangerous, but it's just something worth noting for newer climbers. I think it's good to talk about. So if you go up on a climb, sometimes the book or the mountain project or whatever app you're using will say how many bolts are on the climb. It'll say like, oh, there's 8 bolts here before the anchor. So usually you'd bring up 8 bolts and then 2 for the anchor. But a lot of people who've been climbing for a while bring a couple extra just in case. Sometimes there's been an added bolt since that was recorded in the book, or the person who wrote it in the book or on the app just got it wrong. So having a couple extra quick draws, especially sport climbing, it's like the weight is not a huge factor unless you're going to war on like a 13. So a couple extra quick draws. So I ran out of quick draws. You basically get, 3 bolts from the anchor and you're like, oh shit, I'm completely out of quick draws right now. And obviously I have my anchor systems on me. So there's a couple options you can do there. You can either just utilize the carabiners you have and like clip them straight to a bolt and then clip the rope through it, but there's no extension. Getting a notification. There's no extension, so it can increase rope drag pretty dramatically, but if it's only the last few, you might be able to get away with it. Or you can basically clip the quick draw and then get lowered down and start to basically farm your quick draws off of the last few bolts. Now, obviously there's danger if you were to take, say there's 1 quick draw, 2 quick draws, 3 quick draws below you, and you get lowered down and take the next 2. Then if this bolt fails, your next backup bolt is way lower. So consider that, but just bring up enough quick draws and then you'll never have to worry about it. And if the bolts to length ratio doesn't make sense, like if it's an 80-foot climb, 90-foot climb, it says 5 bolts, then you'd be like, maybe I'm going to take, 8 or 9, because that doesn't make any sense. Yeah. Also, if you can count the bolts from the ground, like depending on the scenario, you can count the bolts from the ground, then you know exactly what you need, which is nice. Number 5, this one sucked. Trusting someone to top belay me twice, same person. So I had this friend who I, trusted and was hanging out with, and she she really wanted to do this really big multi-pitch. It's called the GOAT, actually. You guys might be interested in this. It's called the GOAT. It's in Canada. It's like North America's longest multi-pitch, or it was, I think, or longest sport multi-pitch. It was for a while, and then they built another one right beside it called Guaranteed Rugged. So the GOAT is 19 pitches. Guaranteed Rugged is 33 pitches of sport climbing, which is insane. It's just like a lot of bolts. But I climbed it once in like 2020 or 2019, and then we were climbing it again. This would have been fall 2022. Yeah, fall 2022. Yeah, and this girl was like, "Oh, I've been like climbing on the Chief with these people, and like she's talking a big game." And I was like, "Sick, okay." And we actually went sport climbing together a few times. So I knew she was like a competent climber. She did a bit of trad, and she talked all this game about her multi-pitching. So I kind of just assumed that she knew how to multi-pitch. Bad idea, I guess. I didn't have a good judge of character, because we went and we did a little practice multi-pitch at the base of it the day before. It's like 3 pitches. She climbed the first pitch, and then I climbed up after her. She top belayed me to her, and I got to her, and I was like, that is not set up correctly. Like the top belay she had set me up on was, the ropes were going the wrong way. Basically, she set it up incorrectly. So if I was to fall, I would have just like fallen to the ground, or there would have been very little friction in the system slowing my fall. So I was like, okay, that's sketchy. She had like 99 or 90% of it correct. She just had the ropes the wrong way. So I kind of did a little bit of like okay, does this look right to you? And she's like, I don't know what's wrong with it. And I was like, okay, if I was to fall, just kind of coached her through it. And I was like, okay. We practiced once more, I think, that night, just to make sure. And I was like, whatever, I'll trust her with this setup. It was a 5-9 multi-pitch, and I was like, I probably won't fall. And even if I do, yeah, looking back, I can justify it, but it's stupid. Like, you shouldn't trust someone just because they did it right once and haven't really practiced. Anyway, she confidently belayed me in an unsafe way one time. And then the next day we're like, okay, we'll do the GOAT. And in my head, I was like, I probably just shouldn't fall. But I trust her. She seems like she knows what she's doing. So stupid thinking back on it. But anyway, we get pretty high up, and we're probably on like the 10th pitch. And she was climbing, and you can link pitches on a multi-pitch. So say there's 12 pitches, some of them, depending on how much rope drag there is, you can link them together. So you would climb like pitch 6 and 7. If they're pretty straight, you can just link both of them. Maybe it's going to take your whole rope length, but then they can belay you from the next anchor and then you all the way up. And the reason there's an anchor in the middle is so you can rappel down to it, because that usually takes a half rope length. Kind of a little bit of an aside, doesn't matter too much to this. But anyway, she climbed up and she took a bad fall. And then she was like, I'm just going to belay you up to me from this anchor. And I climbed up, and sure enough, she like had the belay station set up incorrectly. And mind you, we're now like 1,000 feet off the ground. So I was just like, oh man. Now when you're multi-pitching, you're both tied into one end of the rope. So the furthest I could fall is 70 meters, or whatever that is, 70 times 3, 210 feet, which is 210 feet. Like, you can die or just break your legs. But yeah, I got up to her and I was like, you've set up the belay incorrect again. And she had just taken a bad fall. So I think she was a little bit rattled, and like the setup was a little different because it was coming from above and below. But yeah, at that point I was like, I will be leading the rest of this route and top belaying because I can't trust you anymore. And yeah, so that was sketchy. Almost dying twice in 2 days. Yeah, if I got really hurt on the second one, it would have been totally my fault because all the warning signs were there. So be just like the ATC, trusting your friend with the ATC thing, just be vigilant about inspecting your partners and just test on the ground. Like, hey, let's just walk through a simulation here. What would you do if you were top laying? Man, it's pretty brutal thinking back on this. Okay, the last thing here, 6. This one's repelling and stopping at the wrong anchor. So I'm actually going to share my screen in a second here, because I built a little bit of an image to show you. Bang. I'm just gonna finish building it. But basically, the moral of this story is make sure that you know exactly where, ideally, as much information as you can about the climb that you are doing, because especially if you're rappelling down it, because it can get confusing with repels. And I'm going to show you in a second here why. Okay, let's share my screen. This is multi-pitch. I know we usually talk about single pitch stuff, but we're talking about sketchy stories, so might as well share this, and it might help you later on in your life. Climbing, Fig Jam. Okay. Look at that. You can see me. Okay. So to give you context, let's do it this way. What the hell? Trying to make a mountain. I built my anchors. This is my mountain. Okay, send to the back. Okay, so all these little X's represent anchors. And if you go in a route description, it actually looks kind of like this. Obviously a little bit different. It usually shows the features and the corners and stuff like that. But all in all, this is how it worked. So this was meant to be 1, 2, 3, 4 rappels to the ground, right? So this would be, we start up here, me and my brother at the time is who I was climbing with. So we'd start up here, then we rappel down, set up on this anchor, like get safe, pull the rope down to that anchor, rappel once more, rappel once more. Importantly, every single anchor is, whoa, that's not what I want. I want this. I want this to be a straight line. Bear with me, folks. We'll get there in 1 second. Okay. All right, check it out. So the reason why anchors are 30 meters away from each other is because usually, sometimes they're a little more, but usually it's 30 meters. It's like a standard, because typically climbing ropes are 60 meters. So they want to make sure that the anchors, you're able to have a half rope length, because you would do double rope rappels from each anchor. And then this would be going down. Okay, so check it out. This is the game plan. We're going to get to the top. We actually climbed up the other side of this mountain. It's in Smith Rock. Lost in Space is the name of the climb if you want to look at it. It's like a 10B, C, D, something like that. Really epic sport climb. It's like a few pitches. Anyway, we climbed to the top and we're going to rappel down the other side because I read that's the easiest. And I had this route description in my head. And I think I took some pictures. Anyway, we rappelled, but the issue is, what we did, stupidly, is I rappelled to this anchor rather than this one right away. So we zoom right in to the first 2 rappel stations. So the first one I rappelled to, what I needed to do is actually traverse over and go a little bit lower down. But I just saw the first anchor and I was like, oh, this is obviously the one I'm supposed to do. It's plumb line to this. Sweet. So the issue with that, it wasn't an issue right away, because, this was actually, 25 meters. The issue is that the next rappel I tried to do, this is where it started to suck for me. So my brother's hanging out with this anchor. He's trusting me to, take care of him. Was like 32 meters away, right? So now all of a sudden I'm hanging down here and it's just out of reach. The next anchor is literally just out of reach. I'm just sitting there hanging in the air. It's getting dark. We have headlamps on, but I can't reach the freaking anchor. So luckily I actually had the cord lead on me that I always take. And I was able to rig up a pretty sketchy, like, extension into the rappel to get to the anchor and get safe on it. And then my brother was to rappel down, and because he was already in the system, he was able to actually just get straight to the anchor. But it took me a long time. Like, it took me like 20 minutes to be able to kind of finagle this whole system and get this extra 2 meters down to the anchor. And it was all because I didn't assess what I would be rappelling down deeply enough. So I didn't realize that there would be 2 anchor systems there, or 2 fixed gear systems, that I needed to bypass the first one and use the second. So that was that. And then, we got to the next one, rappelled, and then walked the hour home in the dark and cold Oregon desert. But, we learned and we didn't get hurt. So I just want to share that with you, so that if you're going multi-pitching, especially when you're descending down a route that's different than the one you're going up, having a detailed description, pictures on your phones, and headlamps is a good idea. Yeah. Okay. Number 6. Was that the last one? Oh yeah, that was the last one. That was 6 out of 6. I'm trying to think of other sketchy times. I did see someone, I'll add this in as a little bonus. I did see someone once at the crag drop their friend with a gree-gree, and they didn't get super hurt, surprisingly. I'll tell the story. So we're at the crag. It's called Whiskey Jack Wall. It's at Cheakamus Canyon, actually, the same place that my great friend with the ATC almost dropped me, or did drop me and then caught me. But Whiskey Jack Wall, we're climbing. There's a group of like 10 kind of rambunctious, rowdy, younger people. And you can tell a lot of them hadn't been outdoor climbing before, and they were just kind of there to watch and have fun. And there was like 2 guys, I think, in the big group that actually knew what they were doing. But just a big group of friends who were kind of rambunctious, which, is annoying, but whatever. Like, people are having fun. And you kind of always have your spidey senses go up when you see a big group of rambunctious people and no one's really coordinating them or like calming them down, because you know that there's a lot of safety things going on, and if something gets missed, something bad could happen. Whoa. So anyway, what happened was this person climbed up this pretty legendary, this pretty great climb. It's just a fun climb. I think it's in the top 100. And he got probably 20 meters up and then took a whip, or like fell. The problem is he just kept falling. So this climb, to give you some context, has some zigzags. There's a bit of rope drag in the system. And this girl who was belaying him, he falls, goes zzz, and you hear that zipping, and you're like, I was like, what the fuck? And I was actually belaying I wasn't even belaying. We were both on the ground, and this guy fell, slipped down, and the resistance going through the gree-gree, because even loaded backwards, it adds a little bit of resistance. And then the zigzagging through the quick draws adds some resistance as well, or friction. Slowed him down a little bit, but he was still going pretty damn fast. And then his feet hit first, and he rolled onto his back. And we were all like, oh, the rambunctiousness ended quite quickly at that point. And, he rolled over, and that was that second where everyone held their breath. But then he popped up. He's like, oh yeah, I actually feel fine. And I think because he was slowed down by all of those things I spoke about, as well as like he landed on a pretty soft, stable ground and rolled into a pretty soft, stable spot, miraculously, he wasn't injured, or at least he was good enough to walk out and pretended he wasn't injured. Who knows what happened afterwards, if he like cracked a rib or something, but he wasn't saying he was in pain or anything, but it was terrifying. And I think that the moral of that story is that you should load your gree-gree the correct way when you're loading your gree-gree. So that's, I guess, 7 stories. First one, lock your carabiner every time you clip it, is what I do now. Make sure I trust my friend with an ATC only if they are like vigilant and not a space cadet. Make sure you don't go off route, especially on trad climbs, because it's way easier to go off route on trad climbs. Bring enough quick draws. If someone doesn't know how to top belay, don't think that they will learn in 2 seconds. Repelling and stopping at the wrong anchor. So just make sure you do a vigilant research into how you're going to descend from climbs, especially multi-pitches. That way you don't get lost or stop at the wrong anchor and turn it into, they call it an epic when it's just like a epic story. So make sure you don't do that by doing lots of research. And then load the gree the correct way. I've made videos about this too, but I always check that the gree is loaded correctly before I start climbing, on whether I'm the belayer or someone's belaying me. So there you go. Well, I don't even know how much time that was, but hopefully you guys learned something from that and you can not make the mistakes that I did. Peace.